What do we know of the prospects of a potential ceasefire?
Well, Manis, of course, we have to take any reporting here with a grain of salt until the ceasefire is announced. But what we understand both from this Dow Jones report, New York Times, some Israeli media outlets as well, is that both sides do appear to be nearing some sort of ceasefire with the engagement of negotiators from the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. Here's what we understand that this ceasefire would look like. Both sides would be calling for things like an end to building tunnels from Hamas's side, an end to shooting rockets as well. Israel, of course, just wanting to see the violence end, as well as the Hamas side. But what we understand is that Israeli Air Force officials do believe they have are close to accomplishing their mission. That is a message we got from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, seeking to degrade the Hamas and militant position. But who is not involved in this is Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That is another militant group, and they could play a wild card factor in terms of seeing a ceasefire and an end to the violence both go into effect and take hold ultimately.
Yeah, well, there's certainly been a shift, hasn't there, been in the Biden language, moving from from expectation to a slightly more demonstrative rhetoric. Simone, if we do get a pause in the fighting, what happens next? Because the U.S. seems to be saying, look, the main negotiators here are the Egyptians. So what would be the roadmap?
Yeah, and really, I think the question here is a domestic one. If you look at the Israeli side, if you look at the Palestinian side, there is a lot of unsettled political uncertainty within each of those sort of domestic situations. In Israel, this latest bouts of conflict has seemed to empower Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as the hardline, more hawkish factions of Israel, who very much, argue that they have the right to press back against any violence, any rocket attacks. And that could be challenging because we are right now in the midst of the opposition parties to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu trying to organize a coalition. So that a big question mark. Also, the underlying questions about some of the violence we've seen around the Arab-Israeli communities, that a longer-term question that's not necessarily going to be answered by any specific ceasefire. Then again, this situation seemingly having empowered Hamas. When we think about Hamas versus the Palestinian Authority, remember there were supposed to be elections actually 2 days from now, and those got pushed back. But what we do, see is a lot of disenfranchisement, perhaps, among the Palestinian community, and that feeling not likely to go away anytime soon, Manis.